That's the only thing
I had my pen, my special, because my special pen is still over at the other place, probably. All right, it's 5:30, let's call the meeting to order. Up first, the community survey, Mr. Merrick.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I want to introduce Peter Leatherman with Morris Leatherman Company. We asked Peter to come out to talk about community surveys. It's an item that's been in the city's strategic plan for a couple of years now. The impetus was really, I'd say, the former council, where there was this concept of the city getting an abundance of social media commentary and wondering if we were just focusing on those comments and having that set our agenda and policy, and the idea of kind of spreading or widening that gaze to a community survey to understand, are we looking at just a small segment of feedback, or are we getting something that's representative of the whole group? And so really didn't get at the first 2 years, and so with the reboot of the strategic plan, thought before we have this in the 2020 budget, that we have Peter come up, talk about what the community survey looks like, the process that's used, allow the council to ask questions. Before I turn it over to Peter, maybe Glenn, if you could start, and this we can do introductions for Peter.
Glenn Henry, City Councilman.
Lori Sayer, City Council.
Christine Hawks, City Council.
Joy McKnight, City Council.
Brenda Good, Administrative Assistant.
Dan Lattis, City Engineer.
Kelly Trimble, Deputy Fire Chief.
Brian Scott, Public Services Director.
And we met. Already.
So with that, Peter, you want to take it away?
Wow, a lot to unwrap there. I didn't know the social media part was in there. I've heard that numerous times, however, in the past, well, probably 5-6 years as social media has grown and as a representative of what people actually feel. You know, I think I'll give you a broad overview of what we do and how we do it. And then, you know, some specific examples we can talk about, you know, how deep you want to go into the size of the survey, because really the content of the survey is yours. You know, what information do you want to garner from the residents to help set policy, to help set, you know, baselines. You know, if you don't have a city survey in the past, you don't have any baseline, and so you can use it as the first point in time. And as I drove out here and was talking with the city manager down below, when you have this much growth happening, you're going to have growing pains. I mean, I go back to, I've been doing this now since '94, 25 years, when Woodbury was a smaller town. Lakeville was a smaller town. And the growth and the growing pains that happen, because you have, you know, we always call it the tension between the settlers in the community and the newbies. You know, and
All that old Carver, new Carver.
yes, right. And they come in with they have a different set of expectations on city services, on the vision of the city, what they value for the city, and to understand that. Because, you know, if it's not managed well, it can be difficult. Then you can become like Oak Park Heights in that sense, where you just have this constant butting of heads throughout. So, you know, the process that we use, we still do the old-fashioned telephone survey. You know, this is, you know, how we've modernized it is we include cell phones in the mix. Since 2007, the sample consists of a mix of landline and cell phones. In the greater metropolitan area, the ratio typically breaks down to somewhere between 40 and 50% are cell phone only households. Typically somewhere between 10 and 15% are landline only. They exist, they're still out there. And the remainder are a combination of both. We do specifically, there's a reason we do the telephone survey, and that is because it is the only way to get a quantitative representative sample, to be able to say that the margin of error is plus or minus 5%. With an internet survey, with a mail-out survey, you have, there's multiple factors. But basically both of them become large focus groups. There's inherent biases up front with a mail-out survey. I look at my son, who doesn't even know where the mailbox is, much less the millennials are going to go to their mailbox, take something out, fill it out, and then put a stamp back on, and then mail it back. On an internet survey, every community has, there's 10% of people who don't have internet access. That's another very specific demographic. You're going to be over the age of 65, if not 75, that won't have access to it. On the other side, though, you do have then, once you go through the methodology portion, who responds, the self-selection aspect. And it really becomes almost like a social media thing. You know, we know from past surveys, you know, long ago the city of Fridley had us do, the mayor insisted we mail out the survey to every business. But we pulled a random sample within that business community to make sure that we had it, we could look at a representative sample. Well, the representative sample was 10, on average, 10 points more positive than those that chose to mail out, because you hear from people with an axe to grind first. Then you hear from boosters in the community, and that basically represents about 20 to 25% of things are going well. You don't hear from the great unwashed. They're living their lives, 70 to 75% of people. With a telephone survey, everybody has an equal opportunity to be included. Now, the surveys become long with cities specifically, because there's a lot of areas to cover, whether you're doing park and rec, public safety, communications, taxes, spending, all of those sorts of issues. So we work with the communities in order to publicize the fact that the calls are being made. And then, in order to keep the non-response rate, and the goal is always with the city and the school district to keep it under 10%. Typically, we keep it around 5%. Then you don't have any sort of bias. Even if they refuse, we have 3 grandmas on our staff that call back and say, we understand you refuse, but it's really important, and nobody can say no to grandma. So we can lower the refusal rate that way. You know, it's just a way to process. There's all sorts of tricks, because you don't want, you know, a political poll will have 35% non-response rate. Well, you know, at that point, that's a third of the people that have opted out. Or is there something specific? The other way that we make sure that we have a representative sample is through demographics. Every city survey has a set of demographics looking at, you know, residential longevity, home ownership versus renters. Gender's always on there, the area of the city, households with children, education levels, all those things. And we can look at updated information from the census in order to make sure that we're not an overrepresented one or the other, that we have a representative sample. So that's kind of the reason for the telephone survey. And then at the end of the day, we can come back, you know, and with working with cities all these years, it really comes down to sample sizes and cost benefit analysis. A 400 is plus or minus 5%. If we did it in the city of Carver, if we're doing it for Eastern Carver School District, or we're doing it for the state of Minnesota. In order to go to a plus or minus 4%, we have to talk to 625 people. Well, that's 50% more people, that's 50% higher cost. And while I always love to charge clients more money, it's not responsible to say it's worth 50% more for an additional 1 point on the margin of error. So we've kind of landed through the course of the history of the company that for cities, a 400 sample allows us to give you good data within the margin of error. It also allows us to look at those subgroups that I mentioned with the demographics. So we can look at differences between households with children versus empty nesters. In your case, we can look at newbies versus settlers, and look at difference in attitudes and opinions. I think that I can talk a little bit then about the process and how we go about it. You know, the survey is an iterative process, back and forth. You know, I always tell clients, you're responsible to tell me what you want to learn, the topics, the information you want to gather. The one thing that you hire us for, most importantly, is to make sure everything's neutral. And so the actual wording of the question, I can write a question to elicit whatever answer you want, but it doesn't do anybody any good if it's loaded. You could force people into a position. You want it perfectly neutral, so you can have people that agree or disagree, or rate highly or don't rate highly in that sense. So, you know, typically, there's a brainstorming session. You give me the information you want to learn, go back and write a draft, and then it's a back and forth process until everybody is satisfied with the draft on your end. I would say, you know, the typical time frame it takes is from the brainstorming session to the first draft is about 2 weeks. And then the one part that, you know, we can't control is the revision process. I can have it last 48 hours. It seems with some cities it lasts 48 days. It just really depends on how many cooks are in the kitchen. And quite frankly, how well functioning things are within the organization. You know, from that point in time, then once we have sign off, since we're in the school year now, we don't have to worry about, you know, in the summertime, we just keep projects in the field an extra week. So we get people on the front and back end of vacation, so you're not biasing it towards the households without children. Typically, a city survey takes about 2 to 2.5 weeks to complete the calls, and then, you know, from sign off to the time you have results is roughly about 4 weeks. You know, and then at that point, I'll come out, do a presentation. You know, with this survey, since it's kind of establishing the baseline, we won't have any historical comparisons to say, okay, you're up here, down here, looking at the history. But what I'll be able to provide, you know, after 25 years of doing this, you know, we have, you know, comparisons across the state of Minnesota. So, you know, 55%, what does it mean? I can tell you what it means. I can tell you how it compares to cities, you know, with higher growth rates. I can tell you how it compares to Carver County, because, you know, over the course of the last decade, we work with almost every community, but those that we don't work with, we do a spring and a fall survey that goes out and asks questions on the communities, you know, people, what they think about their city, on city services, everything, fill in those gaps so that we can give you a depth to the information. And, you know, okay, this is, you know, an example is always, you know, if you go through and do a list of city services to rate, the lowest is always street repair and maintenance. You know, it's always the lowest rated.
Oh,
Perfect.
Brian.
Sorry?
Poor Brian.
No,
Right here.
right here. And I was down, I was at a city doing a presentation a couple years ago, and it was roughly about 70% favorable, 30% unfavorable. And the city council, and it was stark because all the other city services had single-digit negative numbers. And the city council was, when they saw the results, they were horrified that street repair and maintenance was 30% unfavorable. Until I got up and told them that over the course of the last 18 months, that's the highest rating of street repair and maintenance that we've had. The norm in Minnesota right now is 55% positive to 45% negative. So it allows us to put context to the information. Now, the city council still says yes, but we don't want 30% unhappy about it, and that's true. But your universe of making people happy on street repair and maintenance is never going to be 100% satisfaction like you can get on police or fire or what have you. So,
Hey. I got an application, we can bring you over.
You don't want them to bring baggage.
chase the glory. So I think with that, I would open up for questions. I kind of covered the methodology and the reasoning and the process. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
I have one for Brent. If we were to do this, would we send a notice out so that people would realize that they may be part of this, like in the utility bill or something?
Yes.
Okay, because to me, if I see a number I don't know, or if someone's like, hi, my name is, I'm like, click. So, sorry, it might be you, but.
And they still will. And with cell phones, my goodness, 90% of people don't answer the cell phone on the first ring, even if they know who the number is. So what we do is we leave messages, and we leave messages on landlines also, introducing ourselves. Our phone bank is in St. Paul, so it comes up as a 651 number. As much on a landline, as much as Morris Leatherman fits on a caller ID comes up, it doesn't come up private or blocked or anything like that. And then, but working, whether it's in the utility bill, the local newspaper, put it on the city website, you put it out there, you introduce ourselves, and then we call back. And we'll leave messages again, and we'll call you back, you know. And, you know, the key on, you know, when you're doing a survey this long is to set up appointments. On a city survey, when you get to 100 questions or more, probably 50% of the calls are completed by appointment. So it's not when it's convenient for my phoners to give the survey, it's when it's convenient for the person to take the survey. So if the person says, you know what, why don't you call me back at 9:30 after I put the kids on the bus tomorrow, or on Saturday afternoon, or what have you, to make it convenient for them. And that's the way we can keep that non-response rate so low.
What's an average number of questions you say a city would normally have?
The average number would be probably roughly 130 would be average.
How long does that take to go through? with the
130, probably 20 to 25 minutes.
Really, that quickly?
Yeah.
So, 30 seconds a question.
Well, it's actually because not all questions say, on a city survey, have you visited, you want to look at city staff and their experience at City Hall. Have you visited City Hall during the past 2 years? Yes? Okay, which department? How would you rate the ease of reaching the person, wait time, courtesy? All right, there's 5 questions on the survey that weren't asked of anybody that said no.
Right.
And so with
Survey
branching,
is different.
yeah,
Is it?
and you
Okay.
will have on city surveys, I mean, the longest still, the city of Savage, probably about 5 years ago, the survey was only probably about 100 questions, and we had a lady stay on the phone with us for 2 hours and 27 minutes. That's not the record.
Buckets.
I
So
mean,
you did get the mayor's phone.
well, no, it wasn't. Every community has them. The historian, and they want to share, and, our phoners are not gonna be rude, and they're not gonna say, that's not the question I asked. You just let them talk, and you go through the questionnaire. So, but it averages out roughly that way. Minnetonka does a survey every year, and theirs is 210 questions. The longest
Every year?
every year. Years ago, the city manager decided to tie city employee pay to survey results.
Ouch.
Yeah, do they make it
Wow.
just?
And Brian, you had 30, negative there. You're in trouble.
Where's the application?
You just want to write a check back to us, or?
Change to the survey.
Or like,
To just,
Oh, over the year,
React?
yeah.
yeah.
Or did they make changes like with staff and stuff? I believe they have. I believe they have, yeah.
You rattled off Savage and Minnetonka. What are some of your other clients kind of in our area, Carver County?
We just did Chaska last year.
Okay.
And we've done Eastern Carver School District
Okay.
forever. We'll be doing another one in October for
Another school?
the referendum.
Okay. Can you walk me through how that initial meeting, when you kind of go through the structuring of the questions?
The brainstorming,
Yeah.
it truly is, it just open it up and, find out what you want to learn, and it's specifically, if you want to have a large survey that's broad, if there's sets of questions, for the comparison's sake to make them, we'll ask similar questions to other communities, so we're comparing apples to apples.
Okay.
But every city also has some specific areas, topics, policies that they want to explore. Minnetonka put in outdoor recreation fires this year, and we had to go back and look at the Emerald Ash Borer and stuff like that. So, not only, the broad topics you want to learn, but also specific policy items. And for, visioning, planning, I can make recommendations, we have a discussion, as you kind of tap into, understanding the values of people in the community, I think can be helpful when you're in a rapid growth phase, shall we say.
So one of the opportunities that we discussed at a staff level was, the city has a operations grant for a transit service. It's gonna be renewed probably in 2 to 3 years. So there's a whole kind of line of questions related to how people use transit, where they support the city joining the transit taxing district, and kind of the future of that facility. Another area relates to the city currently doesn't have any franchise fees. And so we have a study being done on franchise fees, and it's been kind of bantered around the concept of kind of apropos dedicating that money towards street maintenance. And so that'd be kind of, fill in the blank of areas where you maybe want to get information from residents. That's why I don't want to dwell on the social media piece, but it may be helpful for the council to have some of that in advance of the discussion rather than having the discussion and then seeing how many people fill the room. And so we we can use that through land use, we can use it for fire recruitment, water, stormwater issues, public services, snow plowing, et cetera. And so I think the brainstorming concept could really get at some of the issues that maybe we don't talk about on a regular basis.
So Brent, when you're talking about franchise fees and things like that, so how are the people who were calling going to have enough information? I mean, if you called my house right now and asked Andy what he thinks about the transit district, he's gonna say, the grant, what are you talking about? So how do they become educated enough to be able to give us answers to questions like that?
It's an art form. I mean, I always thought, I mean, it sounds facetious, but long ago, we came up with a paragraph to describe tax increment financing. And to explain it at a level, because people don't have the base of information, but they have an opinion once if they know that additional money would be used where they prioritize it. Not necessarily if they understand whether the franchise fee process works or whether they understand or agree with TIF. Okay, if you're going to do it, what would be the priority in that sense? You always want to run a fine line, and you know, school districts are notorious for this. I constantly have to tell them we're not educating people on the survey because you don't want to make them atypical. The key is to write the survey so it's understandable for a person who doesn't live and die with this information. So it's imperative on me to make sure that it is understandable. Now, one of the ways, even if there are times that I think it's understandable, but in the proposal you can see there's a pre-testing that we do. So once we have sign up on the survey, we spend 2 nights in the field pre-testing the survey. Now, I don't need to pre-test to understand if they know what, how would you rate the quality of life? Excellent, good, only fair, poor. You don't have to worry about that. But when you're talking something complicated, and to make sure that it's understandable and that we haven't misrepresented anything or led them down a path that confuses them in that sense. Perfect example long ago was Lakeville. We talked about development in downtown Lakeville, and in the course of the pretest, we understood that depending where you lived on Lakeville, your opinion of downtown Lakeville was different. If the settlers, the real downtown, but then 35W for the newbies in the community. So then we had to say, from the pretest, we had to go back and say, okay, we need to change this question and give specific parameters to what we're talking about for areas of opportunity and development. So it's an art form in that sense through the drafting process, but also the pretesting to make sure, because you don't want to write a question that you have 80% of people saying, I have no idea because I don't understand the question. That doesn't help anybody.
So for some of the cities that you've worked with who are growing, kind of like Carver, what can you give, I mean, you talked about a couple of examples, but can you give some other examples of the types of things the city sought to understand and what they did with that information?
I think a good comparison over the past 5 years has been Elgin New Market. Okay. Because as they've gone through growth, I don't think their growth is as rapid as yours is anticipated if you're looking at doubling in the next decade. But they set the baseline, and now they've come back every couple of years, and we've done now. I think we've done the 4th survey for them last year, and as the growth has happened, there are pronounced tensions between the expectation of the settlers and the expectations of the newbies. And the council was still kind of basing, especially when you're looking at park and recreation, and understanding, one key question I would ask is, where are you coming from? Where did you live before you moved to Carver? Because that sets the baseline for expectation a lot in the minds of what's a normal set of city services that are offered. So I think that's just one example. At Minnetriska, the entire west side of Hennepin County, God love them, they kind of have the attitude of, I'm here, let's build a moat around the city and pull up the drawbridges and we're good to go. So, but you need to understand that, in that sense. oversimplified, and don't tell the city
No, he
manager I
didn't.
said that. Yeah.
So for those questions that you're aware of the issues, do you also test solutions?
If possible, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I always, like your example on franchise fees and potential uses for them, I would always prefer it, because, you know, the survey is a mix of open-ended and closed-ended questions. You know, open-ended, what's the most serious issue facing the community? Let them tell you. But if you're looking at something like that, you could say, if the city had additional funds for franchise fees, what would you prefer it to be used for? I, though, would prefer and recommend, guys, I call that a fishing expedition. You can have people come up with ideas that, you know, hey.
Splash pad.
Yeah,
Some are, right?
yeah, I always like to, if there are limits, or you wanna ground them to the reality of the situation, of what it could be used for, close on the list and have them react to specific
Yeah.
potential solutions.
Any other questions?
Peter, I have a question. How, so as an elected official, how do I sell this to people in the community that I stay in touch with? Or they'll think, they're my constituents, it's my job to know kind of the pulse of the community. Or like for all of us, you know, there's 5 of us here that we're elected to represent. Like we should know these things of how our community's feeling. But we're asking them to pay for a survey. How do I sell it to them?
Because, and I guarantee you that you will be surprised by the results, simply because in any community, you hear, you know, you hear from the 10%, the involved 10%. You know, most, maybe 10%. It can go higher if you have a hot button issue. You might get 20, 25, 30%. But to understand the community as a whole, a snapshot representative, because yes, you are elected in that sense, but you all run in social circles. You know, you're not going to have contact with everybody in the community. It's impossible in that sense. And to understand, you know, and there are decisions that you talk to 10 people, you know, you could have 10 people say this is the worst decision ever, but you have to understand all the other factors going into it. And if you ask the community as a whole, it's 7 out of 10 that feel this way. You know, I just completed a survey for the Stillwater School District, and they have huge issues between the school board superintendent and everything like that. And the viewpoint of the elected officials is, I'll just say it this way, is being driven by who they talk to, not the community as a whole. And this really is the only way to go out there and, whether it's, you know, if you can do social media, an internet survey, and mail out, you're only reacting to those who choose to respond. And those that choose to respond are pretty much gonna be that those are you're gonna hear from already. You know, and it's, beyond that, if they don't appreciate that, no, you'll have people that push back and say, yeah, but I'm taking the time, I'm making the effort, the others aren't. You know, they're just living their lives. That doesn't lessen their vote on election day, though. Their vote's the same. You have to be cognizant of the community as a whole. Would be what I would say.
Okay. No, that was helpful.
Yeah.
And I like that word snapshot.
Yeah.
That's a good.
And it is important the survey is a snapshot in time, in that sense, that, you know, change at the city level, I would sometimes describe as glacial. Like Minnetonka, do they need to do it every year? No, but it's time and pace, so it is. But when you're in a high growth area, change can be more rapid. And to keep your finger on the pulse of it, it's necessary. You know, the Eastern Carver School District, their snapshots last for about 6 to 9 months right now. Probably less with all the other issues happening, but yeah.
Do you have any counsel on timing during an election cycle when you can get the most bang for your buck? Is it when you've got a new council? Does it matter?
I would say, from an operations standpoint with elections, we don't call people 2 weeks before a gubernatorial or presidential, because people, even though we're not selling anything or voter IDing, they're sick to death, they think, oh, well, it's just another person doing it. In that sense, when are council elections? Are you even or odd? You're even years, so 2020 in that sense. I mean, I would say, I would give the council that I think the best thing, if it's going to be done going in an election year, is to have it done later this year, first part of next year. I live next to the mayor of Champlin, and he went into this a couple of years ago, that they did their survey late spring, and his opponent argued that he was using the city survey in order to help ascertain in that sense. And
Strategery.
yeah, strategery. Now, there really was, I mean, it's really, you're asking for evaluation of police and fire, and yes, had his question on a hotel, but be that as it may, I would say to keep it as far away from the local elections as possible. I mean, it's not a political tool,
Right.
in that sense.
Unless
But
someone calls it that.
until someone
Yeah.
calls it that, in that sense.
Do you find that you have better response at different times of years?
No, I mean, really,
Does it matter that summer, winter?
no, I mean, really,
More
the-
appointments.
yeah, with appointments in the key, in the summer, it's just keeping it in the field an extra week. I mean, my phoners are very good, and I have enough of them. I could phone these surveys in 3 nights. If you phone them in 3 nights, though, and then you do, that's what pollsters do, you see the poll in the Star Tribune, they phone in 2 or 3 nights, and then they re-weight based on attitude, on demographics. So, but if you phone in 3 nights, I guarantee you the sample will be 60% over the age of 55. It'll be 80% women, because men don't answer the phone in Minnesota. And you're gonna have we call it the honey while you're up factor. Men just don't. And we get around that by, we ask for the person whose birthday's nearest to the day we're calling. And that birthdays don't have any gender bias, as far as we've been able to ascertain. It's better, my mother-in-law got pulled for the gubernatorial race last year by Jeff Johnson's folks, and they asked for the man of the house. And that set her off. She called me up. She called me up and she said, "Do your phoners do this?" I go, no. Well, they better not. This is so offensive. Oh my Lord, person whose birthday. But by stretching it out and keeping it in the field, you don't have these in here. Yeah. That's what her daughter would say. But by stretching it out and keeping it in the field, you can overcome those inherent biases, and then with appointments also.
Do we have the ability, I mean, if we wanted to get really specific, like we wanted to make sure they were only city of Carver residents only, because we have adjacent townships that sometimes have Carver, right? We can get specific about the exact geography.
Absolutely.
Here's my other question about getting specific. Let's say we wanted to have an equal representation of newbies and settlers, to use your terms, compared to what our current resident demographic is today. So today we say it's 50-50 newbies and settlers is our population mix today. I don't know what it is, but I'm just making numbers up. That we would want 50-50 in the respondents.
I would expect the response, if we've done it well, should match what it is.
Okay.
Now, if you want them to be, I'll give you an example. The school district, they'll want to look at a larger cell size of parents sometimes. And now parents would be 30% of the sample. So in a 400 sample, 30% is 90. That plus or minus is 11%, which is pretty wide. So they'll do an oversample.
Okay.
And so we call typically then 210, put it with a 90, and then we have a sample size of 300. We'll still look at the overall results with 30% parents, but then we can pull out specifics. So not knowing, if the newbies are 10%, I would want it to represent the community as a whole, but then you would have the potential to do an overrepresentation to have a large enough cell size to do the comparison.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm done.
I was gonna ask you a question.
Oh,
Good.
wow, okay.
Yep.
All right.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank
Was
you.
that sufficient for the
That was
first item?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you're good.
Way too much pressure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations on your city hall.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It is neat.
All right, moving on to the draft 2020 general fund budget, Mr. Mayor.
Give me a second.
Yep.
That entirely on the wrong side. Look how beautiful that is.
I know, I specifically sat on this side, so I
See
was
one
distracted
circle, I know.
by, yes. It's possible it could happen during our meeting.
Brenda, I think we should use your email for everything we do at the city. Be good,
Be
be
good.
good at the
Be
city
good.
of Carver.
One team, password.
She named her first pet Brett.
She grew up on Brent Street?
Yeah.
All right. So Mayor and Council, we are going to follow up from our August 18th work session. Just wanted to point out some adjustments that we've made since the last time we spoke on this. So the proposed levy is still maintained at the 12.5%. The council still has plenty of opportunities to change that. And in slides further on in the presentation, we get at the methodology that you need to use to get to that spot. Made a slight modification in the 2020 tax impact. The market value increase is 10.07, and I made the calculation at 10.7, so that decreases that estimated tax by $10, and you'll see that in the slide. The fire relief contribution, Steve McDonald was on sabbatical, so we put in a voluntary contribution based on some past studies that we had done, but when Steve came back, he did the mathematics on that, and we don't need to make a contribution. The investments are doing well enough to support the fund, so we push that to zero. Adjustments to cost allocation in several areas, so just kind of truing up areas related to the enterprise funds and building inspections, making sure that costs that are split between funds and departments are done appropriately, so we made some adjustments to that. And it added about $10,500 to the street maintenance fund, bringing that up to close to, or just over $70,000. And then data related to the city's debt service as a percentage of the general fund has been included, and also we included a slide on how your property taxes function as a monthly bill. So I'm going to breeze through kind of the process slides that we went over last time, and give the council an opportunity to talk about kind of the big picture and department areas that you wanted to get into. So again, our new construction value, residential housing increased by 10.07%. The new debt service related to our street projects, and then the equipment certificate. We'll have the public services equipment on the agenda for tonight, and then the specifications for the new fire engine at your September 16th meeting. We have no full-time staffing or new full-time staffing proposed in the 2020 budget. And then again, that strategy to increase street maintenance. And then I've probably overly focused on the franchise fees, but that could, Brian and Dan are working on a spreadsheet of identifying probably our top 5 street areas along with the costs. And so that could be just as simple as saying, okay, it's going to be $1 million to do these 5 streets, and if we want to do these in 4 years, we're going to have to dedicate $250,000, and then figuring out a strategy to do that, whether that's some type of borrowing, whether that's diverting cash from one area to another, just having a conversation about how we want to fund street maintenance. And it was kind of apropos that Peter kind of mentioned that, and how people's expectations are to be met for the most part in a lot of communities. The revenue overview, the slide is the same. Local government aid has gone up. We are anticipating still strong housing permit applications. One of the things that had come out in the last week is BATSI, which is the Builders Association, had put together a report. And there's different pieces to this, but in essence, cities can't charge more than what it costs for the building permit. And based on some studies that the Building Association did, they found that some cities were charging more and kind of making money. And so we were really trying to be careful on how we're allocating costs and making sure that we're only charging for what it costs to run the inspections operation. Property taxes at that 80%, and then utility rates, Brian and I are working on that, and we hope to have that to present to you at your September 16th.
Brent, can the LGA amount, is that set in stone, that that's what we're getting?
It's set in stone as far as that number. I mean,
For this year.
for this, every time the legislature gets together, I would say LGA is kind of always at risk. It's set in stone for, they do the legislation together and that's the number.
Okay.
If they change the bill or go into a different, it usually only comes up when there's some type of budget deficit, and there doesn't appear to be anything remotely on the horizon when it comes to that, so I think we're safe. But I think to your question, that's probably our most unstable source of revenue within our general fund.
And when do we usually see those funds?
We get a payment from memory, in July and December.
And that varies every year.
And there's a complex formula that they use to determine that, and it usually doesn't fluctuate all that often. The numbers that we have now are based on probably mid to late 2000s, so it's been fully restored. This is more than likely, I haven't verified this, but the 148,000 is probably what the city was receiving in 07, 08, 09. You're likely to see this number go down. Chanhassen receives no local government aid. Victoria receives no local government aid. Chaska receives, their number's gone down quite a bit as well. But there aren't a lot of people out there that really understand how it used to be based on pre-1940 number of accidents in your community. There's like all these variables within that. So ultimately, if you leave here with anything related to LGA, is that this is a number, but it can be unstable because it's usually one of the first items that the state will look at to cut if times become hard at their level. Again, draft revenues and expenditures. I did combine the recreation services just into general government, just because it does seem to be a smaller number. Here's a slide that the council had asked for at the last work session. So this is tracking our debt service as a % of our general fund budget. Did talk to Steve McDonald last week about this, and the kind of the standard or best practices is around 20% of debt service compared to the overall general fund. He did say that a 30% number would be typical for a growing community the size of Carver. And when Steve comes out here for our long-term plan discussion, and if we can have a more robust conversation about what that looks like and his analysis. But this does give you a snapshot of what we are, how we're tracking and how we've tracked in past years.
So when we look forward then to 21 and 22, are we going to be going above that 30% again? Because if we're, oh, on. Be good again, Brenda. If, oh, there we go. Okay, another slide.
It'll be based on, it'll be,
Sorry.
Thank you.
Wow.
it'll depend on what our general fund budget's at, and so, we're not taking on additional debt service for next year related to the general fund. And so, 9 times out of 10, that thing is gonna go down. I can't imagine a situation where that's gonna go up unless operating of our general fund, that number goes down, unless this 3.8 million goes down. More than likely, that'll go up by some factor, and the debt service payment is gonna probably stay static for at least next year.
And then with,
But we do have a bunch of stuff on the horizon.
right, and that's what makes me nervous, because we're looking at, I mean, we have no idea yet, but the levy, right, so that's another big one. And then County Road 11, does that come into play in this too?
Yeah, so these doesn't show well with that lettering there, but the 2021 is Levi Griffin Road, and those are ballparks. We should have the money to cover that with mills coming out of the TIF district. But the really big one is the Jonathan Carver Parkway piece, because that includes that going from 2 lanes to 4, from essentially 6th Street to 212. We're also
Isn't it 4th Street to 212?
No, it's 6. I mean, there's some they have some tails as far as transitioning down, but the bulk of it is from 6th to 212.
Yep.
It's okay.
I have a
question.
question back then.
So does that mean that the way things are looking in 2021, there'd be an additional 170
107?
Or 107. from the Levi Griffin?
Yeah, so right now, based on the fund balance for,
That's the one thing we
That
know
debt
would
service.
add.
that's we haven't needed to levy for that because Mills is in the TIF district. Mills is gonna drop out, and so we'll have to pay that debt service. But all the property taxes that Mills generates is gonna go into the general fund bucket then. And so their taxes are then you're gonna be able to draw from that to pay for the debt service. Cause they're paying more than $100,000 worth of property taxes.
So in 2021, Mills for the Levi Griffin Road would contribute 107 that they're not today,
I mean,
roughly.
Right, I mean, that's how that's the simple math on it. I mean, they're just like anybody's taxes, it goes to pay for everything. You don't segregate based on, how you're associated with a certain road. You pay for the road system or fire protection. The one that's gonna impact the levy is Jonathan Carver Parkway. And a lot of that will be based on, frankly, the tax base and how we're managing, the other services that we're providing. Because I think there's a smart way to do that. We, are still working on what it's gonna cost, and Dan Lanis is working with the county on trying to figure out what that scope of work looks like and what the costs are gonna be.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Did he ask, I know I asked a question, but did you ask him, so at what percentage of debt do we start to affect our bond rating? Is there a certain percentage that he's starting to warn to stay away from? Because we're gonna cost ourselves more money in the end when we start putting these projects out and
I asked, he didn't give me a number on that, but we can certainly follow up or ask him when it comes out on the 16th.
okay.
So this step back, this is the this is a bond issue that's going to fall off after 2022, and so we're flattening out these payments just to provide some debt service relief or levy relief in 2020. So this is a strategy as opposed to something that we have to do. The debt service is going to be gone regardless in 2023, and this includes paying off the fire station and some street projects. And then here's our complete debt service schedule for 2020. So you can see City Hall and then the improvement projects for this year, including the equipment certificate. And you can see second from the top, Levi Griffin Road. That's the area that we haven't had to levy for the last several years, but when Mills falls out of the TIF district, we'll be paying that. Now that's with I'm kind of putting a big asterisk on that. If some of the properties, we have deferred assessments on the Marclano property, the Optin property, and the JCP property that are all adjacent to Levi Griffin Road. If those properties develop, annex into the city, then they have to pay an assessment, and that if those properties come in, that'll alleviate our requirement to levy for that because we'll have the cash on hand to make the debt service payment.
Is that enough of a levy to dissuade them from developing?
It's not for me to
Okay,
answer, I
okay.
guess.
And it's not related to the budget whatsoever, so.
I mean, it's what Mills paid.
Okay,
I think everyone they would prefer probably not to pay it, but.
okay.
Well, everyone would prefer not to pay something.
And here's our debt service levy history. You can see the spike in 2019 related to the City Hall project, and in 2020 related to the streets and equipment certificate. And this is the area, so by resolution, the council in essence promises to make the debt service payment. So you really have little flexibility in how you're approaching this. Whatever the debt service says we need to pay is what we really ultimately need to levy. Here you can see our debt service levy history. So as we get into kind of what I'd call the general levy, this is where the council has the most flexibility to establish and create priorities and have discussions about strategy, etc. And so within the fire department, we contract for services with Dahlgren, or provide contracted services to Dahlgren and San Francisco Township. The 2020 budget does reflect new debt service for the 2019 fire engine, so it's not specifically located within the fire department budget, it's in the debt service area. So prorated, that's about $67,000 a year, and we do use that number to charge Dahlgren in San Francisco. It's amortized. I can never say that word. Amortized.
Amortized?
That one. Over 20 years. Then the increase in relief contribution, so that's per year of service, fully vested after 20 years.
Right.
And then increasing the call and training pay from $12 to $12.40, which is roughly 3%, which matches what the city's proposing for full-time employees. Law enforcement, I was able to connect with Commander Mike Woline since your last work session, and so the Sheriff's Office is coming out to your September 16th work session. And so I'll have some background in your packet, but Mike Woline and possibly Sheriff Cameron are going to be out to talk about the evening coverage and answer questions from the council related to that, and really law enforcement in general at your September 16th meeting. And that's primarily related to Lake Township dropping out of the partnership that we've had for the last several years. And so the 2020 budget reflects the increase of going from a 1.65 model to 2.0, where that evening deputy is spending their full shift in the city of Carver rather than driving back and forth between the city and Lake Township. And that contract change increases the law enforcement budget by just over $44,000. And then you can see there the Sheriff's Office coming in September 16th. Any questions on fire department and law enforcement before I move on?
With the law enforcement, Lake Township falling off, but if there's calls for services out there, do we bill them?
No, that's
No, it's an interesting concept.
It falls on, so that I'll let the Sheriff's Office answer that, but there's a methodology for how they charge for services related to frankly a lawsuit that the city of Chaska had for what level of service is contracted and what level of service is provided as just general sheriff's coverage. And it's intricate, so I'm not gonna reach out and try to explain that when I don't have all the details, but Commander Woline or Sheriff Cameron will be able to provide that detail to the council on the 16th. Strategic plan initiatives, so we just heard from Peter Leatherman related to the community survey. The proposal shows $14,000, there's some additional $1,000 in there related to if the council wanted to ask additional questions, or if there was some marketing efforts. Again, now this is a kind of a strategic, kind of flexible piece for the council related to whether or not you wanted to have that in for 2020, or you wanted to delay it, or you wanted to kick the idea altogether. Similar to the JCP improvements plan, dedicating $15,000. Aaron Smith would lead the process, but with a lot of support from Bolton and Mate to come up with a landscape plan or kind of a design plan for the Jonathan Carver Parkway improvements, working with a steering committee. So these are two pieces related to the strategic plan.
So can I just, in the memo from Peter Leatherman, he states that the typical city survey is between 90 and 140 questions, which would be more of an $18,000 to $24,000 cost.
Right, and then, correct.
So I just,
Depends on how many questions you want. I think he
Right.
has a piece in there where the
60 is
60 is
14,000.
14,000.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that we're,
That what he was talking about isn't exactly what we're getting for 15,000.
yeah, that we're clear on if we want to do the full, if we do this, which I think is a discussion for a different day, but I think, we need to not do half, like literally half of the survey. We should ask the questions that he recommends and kind of push those numbers a little higher, or the numbers of questions that we ask, which would in turn push the cost higher.
So I'm sorry, what was the number he had in his agenda?
A 60-question survey is $14,000. He said the typical city survey is between 90 and 140 questions, and it costs between $18,000 and $24,000. Each additional question is $135.
That's a big number to swallow for a survey. Like I said, we don't have to discuss that now, that just,
Well, or
when we're looking
I'll
at
just
police
say this.
services.
Every survey that we've ever had has gone up every year. Every year.
How many surveys?
What do you mean,
have you
cost?
done?
Oh, yeah.
well, everything increases with cost. But we haven't done any surveys before, have we?
Not to this extent, but we have done focus groups and what was the last one? It was 14,000 for,
We had WSB do a focus group to get ready for the strategic plan.
that was 14 grand.
I can't recall what that number was, but. It would be helpful just to have a little bit of.
Are you looking for direction?
Yeah.
I definitely support the idea of a survey, just to get what he kept referring to as the baseline. Because even though it sounds like we've done similar things, or maybe focus groups, and I'd rather see, maybe it has to be 90 questions, more of a full survey, to get a baseline.
I don't know that I'm there yet. I'm more on board after hearing from him, and I do think it would be good to have that baseline and to kind of some of the issues that you pointed out as far as Southwest Transit, the franchise fees and that kind of thing. I do want to follow up with our colleagues in Chaska and some of the other cities that he rattled off to see what their opinion is and kind of what value they saw out of this, especially since we're going into this blind, having
How they
done
want to work
survey
for them.
like this. Yes, that practical application of something like this, because this is just the first step in a larger
Because-
undertaking.
And then is that more money? Do they do it? What do we do it? How does that, I mean?
Well, I
What do
think
we
some
do?
of the things are stuff that we would do right anyways, direction for franchise fees and.
But for me, 15,000, I was on the fence about, when we're looking at 25,000, when we're looking at having full-time police force, and, I said at the last meeting, all of these little things add up to be a big thing. So we have to really look at what our focus should be on right now. So this is kind of, yes, it's a nice baseline, and he's a great salesman, right? So I thought he was really great at selling what he does, but I'm still not on board with that's what we need right now when we're trying to kind of, our streets are failing and we have to do all these other things. Can that money be used somewhere else? Or we're looking at a 30% in our debt service things. It's not just, I don't want to throw money out just because, he did
Yeah.
give a great presentation.
I'll argue with you that if we wanted to whittle down our debt service, we should have been thinking about that when we said yes to the equipment certificate and the fire truck and, all that stuff that we.
Right, but those
Green light.
things, but those things to me
Summer.
are tangible. When that fire happens, they can get in that
Yep.
truck and they can go and use it. The community survey, it's a little more,
Right, but those are
Fluff.
bigger numbers, yeah, and I get that your lots of little things equal a bigger thing, but I just wanna be realistic and that this is a smaller.
I like the idea of this survey in that it gives us direction on where should we be spending money. It helps validate, what big ticket items, what little things should we be cutting out. So I support it for that reason. Is
at
this a good?
23, do you support it? Not just 15, let's say it's 23?
Yeah, because I feel like it's really gonna give us, it's not like a financial advisor, it's gonna give us good direction on what things should we be spending a lot of money on, what things should we just still spend a little, where should we make adjustments? When it equates to dollars. Can I make a comment on the JCP improvements? My one caution with that is, I would really like to see it be maintenance-free. I know it's, whatever they come up with a plan. I kind of jumped a couple of times here. I just familiar with Eden Prairie, has some beautiful areas, and they really do the prairie restoration, but they really struggle to keep it up, and it's costing them a lot of money. That then, 2 years later, they're sitting in a meeting, budgeting, saying, hey, do we really want to spend X amount? So I really would like the plan to look at how much it's gonna cost us to keep it looking nice down the road.
Well, that's part of the maintenance budget. No,
But I don't
we're not
wanna
looking
see
at
the maintenance budget go up
Before we
because
get
of that.
too far
Yeah.
down that, can we go back to the
Yes.
survey, just so we have some direction?
Here, I'll give my 2 cents here on the
Wasn't the right
survey.
ear you
So from where I'm sitting, we could, some of our choices in front of us, or we could do a survey to get some better guidance from residents about directions, policies, priorities, and things like that. Or not do the survey,
And believe.
and we can be what we are today, right? Either making decisions based upon what we think are the right priorities. Maybe we could get some for free task force volunteers who will give us opinions. It might be biased, again, but all of those things are, that's kind of how I'm looking at it, as either, you know, what's the no spend scenario look like? Now, I could be swayed that the community survey will help us make better decisions, that we all as a council feel better about, that we are aligned with the community much better. We have data to say, point to say, we made these decisions because of this. And so I like your perspective about, let's get opinions from nearby communities who have gone through this. What value has they gotten out of it? What surprises did they hear, right, that they didn't think about, and that really changed the way they thought or approached or prioritized something? And if we see value in that, I mean, $24,000 could save us from millions of dollars of debt service, potentially.
If you're going to call you're gonna call these other cities, you think? That you-
I'm gonna reach out to some folks in Chaska and maybe Savage.
I was gonna say,
Just
if we're
thinking
gonna
more of
be
the context, if you guys wanna go through the list and tag team it?
I would say Minnetonka might not be the one to
No.
talk to.
No.
But like Lakeville, even if they've been doing those surveys for years.
Or Elko, did you say Elko?
They-
Did I hear you say you're gonna call Lakeville?
I can call it. I work in Lakeville.
Oh, love
I
it,
can
perfect.
find some people in Lakeville.
Good.
I know where downtown Lakeville is. The real
Old Town?
The real downtown is.
So I just.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not 100% there
Right.
yet, but if you think of resident engagement, I think, you know, you asked the question, how do we sell this, you know?
Mhm.
Try asking just 5 people 100 questions at Steamboat Days this weekend.
Before or after 10 p.m.?
Maybe a little bit of both. We want a representative sample.
No,
But, you know, like, do you know how many people are gonna be at our meeting tonight to give us feedback?
Mhm.
I guarantee you I'll be able to count them on my left hand.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
what I struggle with in this role is just how little, when it comes down to it, resident engagement there is.
Mhm.
So if we can get this by paying $18,000,
Right.
that's gonna be easier than us trying to fill seats in the council chambers or getting people to send us emails on their thoughts. You know, I think people will spout off on a non-city related Facebook page, but it's the same folks, you know?
It is.
This is quantitative, this is statistically significant.
And I would
That's what I
also
like.
argue, I think a survey like this reaches a broader audience.
Mhm.
People who may not be comfortable with telling us how they feel,
Yep.
they would feel comfortable telling one of their survey people.
Right. People who don't leave the house after 7 o'clock and will never
Absolutely.
see in the council chambers, you know, I
Yeah,
do
so that's
see the
how I weigh it.
benefits of it,
That's
yeah.
how I kind of weigh it. I'm with you on that. But I mean, I'm not fully sold, but
Right.
I'd like to hear from some other cities on what surprised them, what made them change their thinking based upon those surveys results.
Or were they swayed at all by it?
Yes, maybe they weren't. I don't
Or
know.
if they tell me, yeah, the information is just sitting on a binder, we haven't moved on it. and-
Right.
Yeah.
We never look at it.
Yeah.
We never even answer it.
Honestly, yeah.
And we were looking for validation.
Versus the other spectrum, the mayor of the city of Minnetonka is gonna tie your pay to this
Right,
result.
yeah, well,
That plowing better be good.
yeah, I don't know, I agree that
That's a little.
that we want, but I think in Chaska, it's my understanding that this was the first time that they had done a survey or a first in a while. So, I plan to reach out to, Mayor Winchell and probably, Chris Schultz, who is no longer on the council, but I know he was when they went through this, so.
Or if he's not on there now, he might have really, I mean, he'll probably tell you really.
Oh,
Chris will tell me.
He'll tell you
He'll
straight.
tell you
Chris will-
early.
Yeah. Okay, how do I say this?
Uncensored.
There we go.
Does that, are we,
Oh,
yes or no, but
I was gonna move to number 2.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so for the steering committee, can you remind me a little bit what their charge of duties is going to be?
So we haven't said that, so that's one of the things we'd ask that council to say, okay, what do you want them to do? From what I envisioned from the strategic plan was looking at, landscaping, points of interest, kind of could be lighting, it could be signage, streetscape type of items. But frankly, we have some work to do for the council to kind of define the critical scope of, what you'd want them to do, and if there's an idea related to budget and how we're putting this committee together, we're gonna have that conversation.
Is this something our community development director can do? I mean, so that, without the steering committee? Because what's the 15,000? What we're paying for the steering committee?
No, so Aaron will just lead the committee, just like, leading like a Parks Commission meeting. The 15,000 goes to the engineers related to preparing plans, renderings.
Can I buy some colored pencils? And I'll do it for less than that.
Do you want me to explain what's in there?
Yeah.
What it is?
Sell us,
No,
man.
no.
Yeah, now
I mean,
I've heard it
How
out.
do we sell this to our constituents?
It's a fair question. It's bigger than that when you think of the actual full delivery of the landscape plan, but it depends on what you would actually end up doing. And what it is you have to pick alternatives. You have to come up with a couple different options and say we want a lot of color down the corridor. We want certain themes, lighting styles, we want monumentation, things like that. You look at your options and you look at here's 3 different ideas, and you react to it and say we like this path. Then you come up with another different set of ideas or a refined idea, and then it says here's your costs associated with these different alternatives. And ultimately, what you end up with is here's what we want the corridor to look like, and here's how much we're going to invest in landscaping the corridor. 15,000 would be relatively small compared to the investment that you'd be making in landscaping in the corridor like this, which in some cases can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so that's really what you're getting at is, do we want to invest 50,000 in this, or 30,000 in this, or $150,000 up and down JCP? And quite frankly, when a corridor like this sets the theme and the tone for your entire city. So in some cases, you're going to be picking themes, colors, you're going to be picking elements that would kind of branch out.
We're gonna be in the weeds, is what
You're
you're
gonna, and these processes can get quite robust. So this was
A little might help you on the process. So Dan's original number was a lot larger than the 15,000, and so I asked and I talked to Erin if she let it, we could take out a bunch of like Bolton and Mink staff time, going to meetings, preparing minutes, making phone calls, and so we've made some attempts. So if the council wants to adjust the scope, or if you don't want to do it at all, we could take that number down. But then Dan explained the process of what you get. On the city staff side, we kind of run the logistics and get everyone together and communicate that.
So outside of that, will we be looking, for competitive quotes from other companies? If Aaron's still leading it, is this the only number that we've gotten from one here where we could look around at some smaller companies, or what do you think that looks like? Sorry.
no, it's
No.
okay.
You certainly could. I think, it's just based on they're our city engineer, and so we, using them because they're going to be working on the corridor, and they have a lot of that institutional knowledge and project knowledge in the tank, and so we'd have to. I don't know what that looks like if the council wanted to do that. We certainly could.
I just don't know what that, I don't know if 15 is a great price for what we're getting, or if it's average, if there's something.
Well, I can explain the price that we give you is an estimated hourly. And so basically, there isn't a firm scope, it's however many hours it takes. If this were decided upon in 40 hours, the number goes down. It's not necessarily a lump sum, it's just here's how many hours, we think might be demanded of a staff to produce what you would typically want to see to make some decisions. But if, for example, all of a sudden we say, all right, after the first meeting, you got everything you want, that number goes down. So in order to actually even do different quotes, I'm just going to tell you straight up from our ability to price it, we would have to set a scope, and then everybody would have to come in and say, here's how many hours we think it would take. That's really the only way you can actually take a look at different numbers, is to say, here's the stuff we want, and here's how many hours we think it would take, and then it's just basically that times a rate. Does that help? Did that answer your question? And I'm not trying to do anything other than explain what that is up there.
Thank you.
For me, while I'm admittedly not all on board with the community survey quite yet, the JCP improvements plan I do believe strongly in. There's gonna be a way bigger number for the JCP improvements, it's gonna be our cost share.
Yeah.
And I think to make this pretty and have this have a look of Carver for the folks who are coming in off of 212 and have this be their first impression of the city, I think it's gonna be worth putting together a plan for landscaping and just a look and a feel. And it goes back to a lot of what we talked about in our strategic plan.
Yeah.
Of incorporating what is Carver and just having that in your face as you're driving into town.
I'd agree. I think spending time thinking through that with the steering committee, looking at options, figuring it out, what do we really want is important.
And this isn't something that we're looking for the council to say thumbs up or thumbs down on. We'll get to the end of the presentation on where do you feel comfortable with setting the levy at?
Yeah.
And as we go through the budget process, you can decide whether or not you want to keep it in. But you might know right now, we don't want the survey, or we don't want the Jonathan Carver Parkway plan, or we want to dedicate 5,000 for that. And maybe you set the preliminary levy a little bit lower based on kind of how you feel about things right now.
And we're setting the ceiling, to reiterate, so we can
Right.
always have second thoughts between now and December.
Correct. So, cover the insurance at the last meeting, employee related, the draft represents a 3.25% increase with the new collective bargaining agreement, commencing January 1st, 2020, increasing seasonal, pay from $12.50 to $14, also increased, just the number of hours, with a representative, increase for custodial services. And if you remember from some following slides, we mentioned that was kind of one of those first outs where short term, or at the worst case long term, we're going to need to probably invest in full-time custodial services to handle the demands that we have on city facilities. This is an item that we're going to be working on related to recreation services, going into the fall with the city of Chaska, and looking at an agreement for the city council to consider. We're going to start off by requesting that the 2020 allocation is no higher than what we have today, just for budgeting purposes, and then see kind of how the negotiations and conversations go from there. But at this point, that's what we planned for. I don't know if we have the capacity to increase that by X amount without having a full conversation on an agreement. And I think they'll be okay with that. So again, here the budget choice is not included. This is the same list with one exception. I added the Carver Monument sign, so that was a piece from our strategic plan. So think of the monument sign at the end of 6th and Broadway. So those are roughly about $12,000. So if you wanted to include that within the draft, that would be an item that you could pull. Any one of these pieces, you can pull. Christie had mentioned to me that the Lions are interested in donating $5,000 of funds toward a holiday decoration, so we're on a path toward removing that from this list. Any questions on this slide?
Where were we thinking about putting the monument signs?
We had roughly talked about
40 and
up on 40 and your community park, but I don't think the council had formally said like we want one here, this one first and this one second. And then these are kind of the last ones in, street maintenance, evening patrol, recreation partnership cleanup. But the two that the council really discussed tonight in length, the community survey and landscape plan. And so based on what's in now and what's out, you're at a 9.2% general levy increase. And so here you can see our history going back to 2016. and then our total levy history again. So the debt service levy and the general levy are combined. You can see that total levy, debt service, not a lot of flexibility. General levy, really complete flexibility. And so you can see that increase year over year, and that percent change. And so what we're looking for the council to do at your September 16th meeting is set that total levy number
Not to exceed.
not to exceed. And so here's that total levy history. And this is probably, hopefully, a helpful slide to you looking at where we're at now and what you'd have to do to get to various preliminary levy options. So if you wanted to increase to get certain things that are out in, or if you want to take certain things that are in and push them out, you can see kind of what we need to do to get down to a percentage. Before I dwell on this slide, I just wanted to get into kind of what it all means and looking at the tax impact. So here you can see our new construction along with our market value change and what that means as far as a proposed tax rate or estimated tax rate. And so we go to 49.64. And so the average value home in Carver is $300,000. And so the taxes that they paid on average is $1,466. So if we take our new tax rate, 49.64, they'd be paying $1,438, which puts you at a difference of $28 now. Not every home is going to stay at that $300,000 on average. Now there could be some more, some less, but on average they're going to go up just under 10.1%. And so you can see here the corresponding tax impact paying $1,601. And so if you go back to that same home in 2019 paying with a value of $300,000, if their value went up based on that average, they'd be paying $135 more in property taxes. And so this
For
is
a $30,000 increase in value.
right. And so we've had some success explaining this to residents as far as looking at their property taxes as a monthly bill for city services. And so, based on that $300,000 paying $1,438 per year, equals out to $120 per month. And then you can see based on the percent of each general fund department area, what that corresponding fee is to kind of run those city services. So looking to our September 16th meeting, I guess looking for some general comments to the council on any part of it, but maybe specifically what you are wanting to see at your September 16th meeting in terms of the preliminary levy. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to vote on the preliminary levy tonight. We can't vote, but if you have feelings on whether or not you want to see several different options for levy numbers for the 16th, we can do that. Past practice has been that kind of by consensus, whatever the work session kind of emotes as kind of an opinion is what we put together for the levy for the next meeting. So past practice would dictate right now that we put together the 12.5%, but if the council wants to change that up, we can certainly do that and provide, one at 12.5, one at 11.5, or you could frankly change that at the meeting too.
I'd like to see what a percent lower looks like. What gets pulled, how we work that around. I really, for 27.7, to get it down by percent, I really like to see what that would look like, what we'd be cutting out. And that's my opinion.
I'm comfortable, especially, excuse me, with the ceiling being at 12.5.
I'm good with the ceiling.
Yeah.
There. I just like to see what was coming out.
Yeah, I think my concern, so this story is gonna be in the Chaska Herald right next to what Chaska's levy increases are gonna be, and they're gonna be 8.9% or whatever, I think the benchmark for me, not that I wanna go any higher, but I think what would be significant would be having it under 10%, and we can't cut $82,000 out of this budget. I think all of the big ticket items we've already approved while knowing it. The equipment certificate, the
city hall project, you know, this is stuff that we're locked into, we are completely married to for the next 20 or so years in most cases. So taking out a survey is kind of a drop in the bucket, but
And that's a fine way to look at it. My way to look at it is every percent affects every person in this town.
agreed.
So I would be
I'm
happy
not
to look and see.
I'm not
what it
against,
looks like, but not necessarily that it's possible. But I'd like to see what that looks like. If we're taking it out, what are we taking out? And what it could be, so.
Would it be simply the budget choices that we included that we would start with to take out? Would that be approach that you guys
You
would
could-
take, or?
You could do it one of two ways. You could just say, Brent, work with the team and come up with that amount, or you could provide some detailed direction to say, we want that number to include the community survey, or street maintenance, or film and plank. So we can do it one of two ways. I mean, the reality of it is it's not, you're not, to borrow on the mayor's phrase, you're not married to it until you adopt the budget. It's just when you drop the, whether it's 1% or 5%, you'll make it harder for the other things. But, so what Councilmember Mock said is if you take that out, then you reduce the scope of kind of, what you have to frankly worry about. You're kind of limiting the increase in the long term, so.
If we all want to take it all from Brian, I mean, he's a -3% at this point. No, but did we not add more to the street maintenance fund? Is that what you?
that's what I was just.
We did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
70,000, right?
no,
No,
10.5.
it was increased to 70,000.
That was just a curious question. I didn't say we take it
So
right back.
we could easily find that 27 by eliminating what's dedicated for the survey. Sorry, Brian, the street maintenance fund, although I don't know that that's the wisest move. The additional $10,000, that was the difference between this month and last month. And then it's $2,000 more to get to that, and that's sharpening.
There's the stuff
Most
that's
pencil.
included in it right there.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time.
There's more, I mean,
But, I mean, we can go back and go
One of
through
the- one
line
of the
items
things
by
that
the,
we-
in the budgets too. But the reality is, when the department heads put those together, they put it down to their bare minimums of what they need to get by. I mean, they do a hell of a job putting their operations budgets together. When
I
I,
wouldn't say everything's the bare minimum though. I mean, some of this is things that.
their
Our budgeting
operations
is-
budgets,
Yes. But, I'm sorry, your operations budget, go ahead.
the operations budgets have been very, very, over the past years, they have been spot on. I mean, they cut all the fat out and they run them lean for the last 9 years that I know of. As far as what we're looking at is, in adding to it, the survey, the community survey, I think we got a good pulse of what the community wants. They want a Jonathan Carver Parkway corridor that's gonna work. The biggest bitch I hear about is the roads. It's just the flow, and when you tell people it's 2021, they're like, oh, so you're looking at it. Well, yeah, we've been looking at it for 3 years. But they don't understand that. I mean, we can, 15 grand for Dan services for the landscaping plan, that's fine. I want it to look good because it is Carver. It's going to be our new corridor. We want it to be something that is gonna be welcoming. So I don't have a problem with that. After looking at other budgets from other cities and what their engineering fees are, 15 grand, that goes a long way for that. But when we look at what we've done with our bonding the last 5 years, we've covered, all we'll have now will be new construction roads and maintenance. We don't have the big projects that we've done to make to clean up all the streets in Carver. They're all done. So we won't be having any more of that coming down the pike. That's all been accomplished. City Hall, elephant in the room. Everybody knows that that's where the bulk of their taxes are going. Because they see it. Every time they drive it, there's our new building, okay? They've seen what we've done with all the roads in town. They've seen what we've done with City Hall. They know that we're looking at the corridor. I look at where this budget, a little bit for it, for Dan's, for your work on that, for the landscaping plan, everything, is money well spent. People know that that's what our next focus is. As far as surveying the people of what they want to see for services and recreation and stuff, they know it's going to come in the Chaska, in the monthly or in the quarterly thing that's coming out for our park and rec. They know that that's what the majority of it's going to be. Everything that's in there, we don't really hide a lot. We'll offer more services downstairs. So I look at that, that's a win. They'll be coming into the City Hall. As far as our budget, I think 12.5, and if we go at that number, people already know what we've spent, they already seen what we're doing. We're pretty open as to what we're going to be coming up with for 212 or for the JCP corridor. They know that's gonna cost money. If they want it for free, they're wrong. I mean, the county doesn't have any money for it. So the reality is 12.5 for the draft budget, not to exceed. I'm perfectly fine with that. We can look at what we could cut out, no problem with that. But I don't wanna go too lean on the stuff that is going to bring us 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road.
Okay, and I'm fine with the ceiling for 12.5 right now, but again, if we'll
We
take
can
a
look at it.
I wanna take a look at the 11.5.
So for the interest of time, unless I hear anything else, we'll provide a 12 and a half and 11 and a half number. Is there any?
Okay.
Everyone okay with that?
Yep.
And then the only other item I wanted to mention is related to the facilities policy, which we want to bring back to the council. We're struggling finding building hosts for the $13, $14 an hour. So we think the better number is probably right around $20, but don't want to provide a hardship to especially the civic group tier. And so I talked to the city attorney, Larry Harris, and talked about the concept of exempting that first tier from the building host requirement since we're not charging a room rental. And he said he'd be fine with that. And so my intention, not that the council needs to vote on it, would be to bring that back to the council on the 16th to consider removing or adding that exemption to the policy. So that's just a FYI. That's all I have.
Right, in the interest of time, because we have to transition to the other room,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
perfect, I'll second. Motion by Councilmember Sayre and second by Councilmember Mott. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?